Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and this is my review of the B&T XH RBS Ti suppressor. I love B&T cans as a general rule. Frustrating thing about B&T, if you guys don't know, they've been in the suppressor game for a long time, mostly in Europe, but they had, over the past couple of years, I'd say past decade, when B&T USA became a really strong brand here, they started bringing in more and more of their suppressors. The problem is they change up their lineup so frequently. It seems like every time they come out with a new can, it's replacing one that they came out with a year or 2 years before that. So they have a lot of turnover, and with everyone going to 3D printing and this big demand for forward gas venting, or with B&T they call it reduced back pressure, their reduced back pressure system, RBS, it can get a little frustrating because I'm like, oh, let me buy the newest B&T can and do a review on it. And then I do, and then 6 months later, they've already replaced it, which isn't a bad thing because some of those other ones are going to stay on the market. You can still get the old Rotex line and things like that. This is a 7-inch, 10.5 ounce titanium 3D printed suppressor with a 1.7-inch diameter. So it is a long boy. It's a 5.56, this particular one's a 5.56 caliber. You generally don't see a lot of rifle suppressors being at that length these days. So it's a little bit longer of a suppressor, which makes me a little particular on what kind of guns I'm going to put it on, but running it on like a 10.5 or something like that, that the additional length is not really going to be a factor, and the weight is fantastic. I mean, 10 ounces for a 7-inch suppressor with a 1.7-inch diameter, that's pretty badass. It is hub compatible. It is quote-unquote Surefire-centric. They use the same system that Surefire does, or I should say Surefire uses the same system that they do, although the design is a little bit different. I prefer the B&T design over the collaring system that Surefire offers, although they will work on either muzzle device, either B&T's muzzle device or Surefire's muzzle devices. But since it's hub compatible, you can run it direct thread, you can put a chemo on it, Xeno, Reardon, whatever you have. Now, it is a 3D printed suppressor, which is 3D printed titanium, but it has a 718 Inconel blast baffle, which is very important. Even your longer cans, blast baffles are still going to be important because even though the suppressor is longer, the length of the barrel may still be whatever length you're going to put it on. So if you're going to run it on like a 10.5 or a 7.5, 5.56 or something like that, that blast baffle is going to be monumentally important. And this isn't a suppressor that they're marketing for lower volume or precision rifle application. It's considered a hard use suppressor. Another factor that we get into with some of these forward venting cans, or reduced back pressure system as B&T calls it, is muzzle signature tends to increase, and when you add titanium to the mix, you might also get sparking. So that was something I'm definitely going to be looking for, or was going to be looking for through the 2,000 round review. Now, for the review purposes, I used a lot of different rifle lengths on it. For shooting 5.56, I also shot some 5.45 through it. And just getting right into it, the first thing you're going to notice, of course, is the tone. From a 7-inch can, I'm expecting a really good tone, even on shorter guns, and I was pleasantly, well, confirmed, or affirmed, if you will. The tone out of the XH print is really soft. It's not, obviously, movie quiet, but for a 7-inch suppressor, it's what I expected. Even shooting it on like a 10.5 or an 11.5 or 12.5, I'm getting a really good tone. I can't underscore that enough. I love the way this suppressor sounds. Now, if you want actual decibel performance, you're going to have to go to Pew Science or somebody like that. But to my shooter's ear, the tone of the suppressor is fantastic across all lengths, so we can just get that out of the way immediately. Now, as a forward venting suppressor, they also incorporated a low flash end cap, which is, they don't call it a flash hider, but it has flash hiding attributes. And that's something we'll talk about a little bit later in the video, but that's part of a factor in the gas management. Some of the forward venting cans tend to increase felt recoil, or they cause a change in the way the recoil behaves. And there's also some internal things that we have to worry about depending on which muzzle device we're using. And one thing I've noticed, especially with high back pressure previous generation suppressors, is if I take that suppressor and I put it on a gun that has a brake on it, that brake is still braking inside of the suppressor and it's pushing more gas up against the top of the suppressor than it is venting it like a flash hider would. So that is a factor in recoil. I use brakes but also flash hiders throughout the review on this with the different muzzle devices, different adapters. And the recoil push is very soft. I've got a lot of gas venting out of the front. Also, the bullet, of course, is leaving out of the front, but I didn't have any undue changes in rapid pressure that were causing the rifle to behave strangely suppressed versus unsuppressed. There is a noticeable change in the recoil pulse, but it wasn't a factor across the different guns that I used it on. So, as a very long can, it provides for a very soft shooting platform, even on those shorter guns. Putting it on longer guns is just fantastic because, especially if it's something that you can gas tune, because it's going to be a soft can already. If we're going from a 10.5 to a 16 or an 18 inch. By putting it on that longer gun, I'm not adding a bunch of weight to the end of the muzzle because it's a lighter can, even though it is 7 inches or more, depending on if you're using a mounting device or not a direct thread. But the recoil pulse just stays, well, it gets better. So in my experience in the review I did, the longer the gun, the softer the recoil pulse. And I think that's pretty awesome. Now, because it is a longer suppressor, I tended to gravitate to shorter guns for the review processor, just to keep the review process, just to keep that overall length, not overall lengthy, if that makes sense. So 7.5 up to 12.5, put it on a 13.7, but it's not something I really put for any long period of time on like a 16-inch DMR or anything like that, even though that'd be perfectly manageable. It is going to increase your length, obviously, but the added weight was negligible. For precision testing, I mounted on a Roscoe Uppard ADM, which has a 12.5-inch Sage K9 precision barrel in it. And get to the accuracy check as well as that. But getting into just general performance of the suppressor, talked a little bit about muzzle signature already. We already talked about recoil. Using it in low light, under low light conditions, I ran it on an 11.5 Suns, and the sparking is there. A little bit minimal though. And this is something that's pervasive with TI cans, where sparking is going to be a problem. Sometimes it goes away. Most of the time it does go away after a certain amount of rounds. To me, 200-300 rounds usually, sometimes a little bit more. When I got into the low light portion of running this suppressor, I was at 1,000 rounds and I was still having some sparking occur. But the muzzle signature showed you guys a cold bore shot. That first 10 rounds through the suppressor, ambient temperature, it was about 40 degrees outside when I did that. Muzzle signature, I didn't have any really bad first round pop. The end cap and the gas management is working together in a really good relationship there to minimize that muzzle signature. But I did have a little bit of sparking. To me, it doesn't bother me. But some people may point that out as that's a reason why it's not the perfect overall greatest suppressor ever, and I think that gets pretty subjective anyway. So for low light performance, I'm not having any interruption of my sight picture. I'm having good overall performance just with muzzle signature in general. A little bit of sparking, but it's not noticeable. Honestly, I noticed the sparking more when I was editing the video than I did from the shooter's perspective when I was actually shooting the gun at night and filming. Weapon light's a factor as well. Shooting under night vision, you're going to notice sparking more because of night vision. Also, you don't always have the same cone of light that you would running a weapon light. So even if you're pushing IR light out of like a PEC 15 or a MAWL, especially at extended distances, unless you're really messing and want the MAWL, it's a lot easier than PEC 15 to actually bring your IR light in. You're not seeing as much of that light reflected back off of the weapon light. Smoke signature is going to be a factor. Ammo length, there's a bunch of other things in there. The gas has got to go somewhere. These cans prioritize pushing it out the front. So one thing that you do happen to notice sometimes, depending on your weapon light, ambient temperature, humidity, the ammunition you're using, is you can have more of a obscuring cloud present when you get into your round count. So usually first, second round you're going to be okay, but then that volume builds. If it's a nice still night, that smoke cloud doesn't move, so you're still shooting through it. This wasn't any worse than any other suppressor I'd ever used, so I can't really speak to that being a problem, but it is something that you will notice shooting under low light, where sometimes, especially at extended distances, it's harder to, it's going to obscure your target a little bit more. The easiest way to solve that problem is just move. And this is something that's common across a bunch of different guns shooting at night. Handguns not usually as bad depending on the quality of the ammo, but with rifles, rifle pressures, length is a factor, like I said. Shooting on an 11.5, the cloud was a little bit annoying, but it wasn't something that I couldn't shoot through. I'm not going to blame that on the suppressor. As far as functionality goes, I shot this on traditional DI guns, but also on piston guns. And some forward venting cans, or in B&T's case, the reduced back pressure system, can create cycling issues. And I've actually had this happen with B&T's, and I did a video a long time ago where I was looking at B&T's last generation, or I should say their first generation of reduced back pressure suppressors. And with that suppressor on one of their APC 300s, I could not get the gun to cycle reliably. I purposely introduce a piston gun, at least one, into almost every suppressor review I do to see if that's going to be a factor. And it wasn't. Using it on an MCX, 11.5 MCX, it was just boringly reliable. So no cycling issues there. Using it on a SCAR, same thing. Sometimes I throw more than one piston gun into the mix. On a DI, I think it's going to perform best, honestly, because piston guns can be a little bit more finicky when suppressed, depending on the generation and the priority of the gas management inside the suppressor. I think that they have a really good baffle design going on in this thing. It's giving me really good performance, and some of our 3D printed forward venting suppressors tend to prioritize girth over length, which I generally prefer, but it usually adds weight to the suppressor. What I like about what B&T did with the Print XH is they gave me a longer can, which I don't necessarily mind depending on the gun, although I would prefer shorter if I can get it, if it's got the same performance. But they didn't overly increase the diameter at the same time. And there's nothing worse than a long, girthy can. Finally, we've got to talk about accuracy, right? You guys know I do this with all my rifle-centric suppressor reviews, accuracy check. For this, I used my Roscoe 12.5. 100 yards, gun zeroed for 100 yards using 77 grain Black Hills OTM. First 5 rounds, zero confirmation, just seeing how the gun is printing at 100 yards, bipod bag supported. Then I remove the suppressor, take it off the gun, and fire another 5-round group, 100 yards, bag bipod supported, to see what the zero shift is like, if there is one at all. And then finally, let's see if there's a return to zero. I'm going to go ahead and throw that suppressor back on the gun for the next 5 rounds and see if we lost our zero by removing the suppressor. So not only did I get a good return to zero, that zero shift is pretty legit. And it's repeatable, of course. Take the suppressor off, shoot another 5, put the suppressor back on, shoot another 5. I was getting good data on all of that until the gun got really hot and I got really bad mirage on the suppressor. Generally, when you guys see on video, I'll do 5 suppressed, 5 unsuppressed, 5 suppressed. Just to cut the length of the video, and I'll only put it on video if there's a problem. I keep shooting after that. I shoot until the mirage is so bad that I can't see through my glass and actually get consistent hits. But I took that, usually that's right around 25 rounds as fast as I'm on, off, 30 rounds. So I do 2 cycles of it to see what kind of issue there. And then return to zero on the suppressor was fantastic, but also the POI shift was consistent as well. So if you had to, it's something you could dope for. As far as the gun relationship goes, 7 inches is going to be a little bit longer than some people would prefer, but you're saving a lot of weight. And that's where the magic of this suppressor to me is really impressive. There are other cans that are about this size that weigh about the same. So it's not like they're doing something that no one else has done before. But they're checking a lot of boxes with this particular setup. I've also got the Mini, which you guys will be getting a review on, and because they're pretty much the same can, although one's shorter, I'll do a little bit of a talk about comparison in there because it's kind of unavoidable. But as a full-size, duty-rated, or duty quality, or hard use quality suppressor, the weight is fantastic. So I'm getting the performance of a full-size suppressor, but almost at the weight of a K-length or a mini suppressor. That's pretty cool. Didn't have any functionality issues going from DI to piston, be it long stroke, short stroke. That's pretty cool. There's a lot of cool things going on with the suppressor, and the fact that it's hub compatible, which is more and more common these days. I can run it on whatever gun I want, and because, and this is in regards to the full length, I don't have any baffle impact issues with my muzzle devices or my hub systems. So I ran a Surefire, ran a Den Air, ran a Xeno, ran direct thread, and even using like a Nox versus a traditional dead air flash hider, dead air brake, surefire brake, surefire flash hider. I didn't have any insertion issues. Everything was working as it should, and I could just throw the hub on there, whatever device I was going to be using, it would mount directly to the gun. I go to the range, shoot the rounds. So over 2,000 rounds, I had really good performance out of this thing, and this is an awesome can. And I know sometimes you watch a review and you get a little frustrated because you're like, well, is everything awesome? No, everything is not awesome. But just trying to be as objective as possible, I'm still a human being. I can still be impressed with things. And because I do so many suppressor reviews and I buy so many suppressors and I've used so many suppressors over the past 20 years of shooting, I was there in the dark ages. Well, not the dark ages, but I was there in the early dark ages. The assault weapon ban had just expired. Suppressors, for some reason, started to become more of a thing, even though they weren't even related to that ban, but muzzle devices were a factor, so I think that might have been part of it. And a lot of those earlier suppressors were still using 1950s or earlier baffle design. You still got cans today that do that, and they try to charge you $1,200 for a suppressor because of the branding and the marketing, but when you look at the baffle design, you're like, isn't this Hiram Maxim's design? Like the patent expired, so y'all just running with it? Like this is from the, the 30s, 40s, 50s. 3D printing allows people to do cool things that you can't do with traditional CNC, but another problem with 3D printing is some companies are just trying things and they're beta testing them on the public. So it may be good at forward venting, but it's not so good at sound suppression. And, I brought up the tone earlier in the video, talk about it again now. Some 3D printed suppressors just aren't that quiet. I think that this suppressor, at least in regards to this, we're not going to talk about the Mini yet. I'll do another video on that. This suppressor's tone is mostly attributable to the length. I think that the gas has more dwell time inside that baffle stack, so it does give us a more pleasant tone at the shooter's ear. I'm not going to drop a spoiler on how well the tone is when we go to a shorter suppressor, which has less baffles. But as a full-size can, this is a fantastic choice. Signature is really good. The weight is fantastic. The ability to, it's hub compatible. I don't have anything bad to say about it, except for, I guess, if I got to be nitpicky, I would prefer there to be no sparking once I got 1,000 rounds through it. But sparking is something that occurs on a bunch of different cans. You just tend to notice it more with cans that are using titanium. So if you don't have a B&T can and you're thinking about getting another suppressor, this is definitely going to be the one to get until inevitably they replace it with something better in a year from now, which is kind of annoying. But that doesn't mean anything because this suppressor is still going to be good. And they're really kind of up against the envelope of what kind of realistic performance you can possibly get anyway. So if you're curious about my opinion on B&T's new Print XH RBS full size, it's an awesome can, and I would highly recommend it. Till next time, here on Count Stage Dynamics, train accordingly.